Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello everyone, welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man, and joining me today is Neil Kramer, and we're going to talk about his recent book, The Unfoldment, and it deals a lot in Hermetic traditions and, spirituality and, actually a whole host of other things. It's a very fascinating book, and if y'all want to learn a little bit more about Neil, y'all can go to www.neilkramer.com. And I think he's even got links to his books over there. He's got his media appearances over there, events, and anything you could possibly need to know about him. If y'all are interested in buying his book while you're here at the show, just scroll down underneath his show description, and you'll see his book there, linked directly to, or his book cover, Amazon. And tomorrow that will be moved to the archives, but it will still be on my site for easy access. If y'all would like to call in and ask questions, the call-in number is 832-632-7904. For people that are listening elsewhere, if you want to come catch the show live and get into the chat room and ask questions in chat, the URL is www.paranormalpalace.com. You do have to sign up with the site to get into the chat room, but membership is free, and it's only there for spam protection. And without any further ado, let's go ahead and bring Neil on and have a little chat with him. So, Neil, I want to thank you for coming on my show tonight, and I'm glad we got everything worked out and we're ready to go live now.
Hey, Royce, thank you very much for having me here. It's great to join you tonight.
Okay. Now, what I usually like to do is a kind of an icebreaker, give my listeners a chance to, know a little something about the person they're listening to, is I ask them basically, what was their interest or what got them started writing their book that they're on, or the, subject matter they're into, in other words.
Yeah, well, I think for me it's been a lifelong thing, really, which is just kind of not buying the mainstream story of reality. So really from being a little kid onwards, I have had a deep suspicion that the world we look out at every day and the world that we tutored in by our parents and teachers and colleagues and workmates and whatnot is kind of not real. It's kind of not true. And that really was more of a feeling than anything else. So my quest, if you like, my passion for philosophy, for spirituality, for esotericism, for, the unusual aspects of life, to put it in plain English, was really a study of why the mainstream reality version isn't very real. Why is that? Why is it illusory? What's the purpose of that illusion? Why don't we tutor each other more deeply in what is actually going on in the world? Why are these strange deceptions and so on? So, as you know yourself, when you start to ask those questions, you look at lots of different things, and some of it is spiritual, some of it leads into religion, some of it leads into alchemy and hermeticism, some of it leads into conspiracy research, and I have just found that there's kind of like a thread that runs through the whole thing, and a lot of the truth and a lot of the wisdom that helps us make sense of what's going on is actually surprisingly old. It's like thousands of years old.
Yeah.
And in a sense, one gets the feeling that really what we're doing is digging up really old artifacts, if you like, kind of dusting them off and describing them in a 21st century way. But the wisdom itself is actually quite old. So we need to repackage it, we need to reinterpret it, I think, and we need to use modern language and reference it to modern things. But you get this sense that the real truth of what's going on has been seen before many, many times over millennia. And what we're experiencing now is kind of nothing new in a way, although there's some unique elements to it. It's an old story, and one can take some comfort in that, to say, well, yeah, there might be a lot of bizarre and exciting and peculiar and adventurous things going on, but there are precedents for this, and that's really what I talk about in The Unfoldment, to say this is known, this world is quite well known and quite well mapped, but that's been hidden from us, so let's go and take another look at it.
Right. And, like you say, this here you're referring to as it's a timeless wisdom. I mean, it was just as relevant when it was first written down 6,000 years ago or better as it is today.
Yeah, that's right. And, it's funny how you get these dusty old books off the shelf from not just like the, Hindus and the Buddhists and Zoroastrians and Mithraists and, funny books from Spain and Germany and Italy and France from the 14th and 15th centuries, which is a lot more modern, but still very old, particularly living in America now. I appreciate the sense of history, is quite a big thing over here because, most of it's really only 300 or 400 years old at most. But in Europe, to be reading mystical texts from the 14th and 15th and 16th centuries is quite old. It's still quite old. But when you get those off the shelf and have a look at them, the relevance of it and how pertinent that is to today's society is astonishing. And it's as if it was written last week, I think. I mean, you've got to get around the language a little bit, and obviously they talk in a funny way sometimes. And obviously that needs to get translated first into English from whatever native language it was in, and then the English is, of course, rather old-fashioned. But once you get past that, and you get the gist of what the guy's saying, and its real resonance with wisdom and with truth, it's as if it was written specifically for right now. So that, again, gives one the sense that, there's guys who've sat around and looked at this world very, very deeply for a long time. They've left us clues to say, this is what's going on, people. This is why it happens, and this is what we can do about it.
And it wasn't always easy to leave these clues. They sometimes had to embed them in art and, other things as well. And even some of the ones in the Bible are written metaphorically, in other words. So, I mean, because people were suppressing a lot of stuff in the literature and in the arts for many centuries there.
Yeah, that's right. And, I have a lot of sympathy for anybody who's been brought up in a strict Protestant or Catholic or Methodist or Jehovah's Witness or Mormon tradition and, kind of gone through that and, seen a better way to express their divinity and to share some kind of relationship with God, if you like. People who've come through that, I could understand why they'd throw those books away, the Bible and so on, and just think this is just you-know-what, and throw it in the trash can. But again, repeatedly in my studies over the last 20 years, really, there is a lot of stuff coded into the Bible. And at first I thought that was, very relative and open to interpretation, but it isn't. It's quite firm. There are some things very clearly coded in for the esoteric student to say, look, for the normal guy, we're going to do it in parable. For the people who can't be bothered to think, we'll give them just normal stuff. And as it says in Mark 4:11, unto you it is given to know the mystery of the kingdom of God, but unto them that are without, all these things are done in parables. So, i.e., if you're really interested in ascendance and in growth and in deep spiritual radical philosophy, then you will start to unpack and decode some of the stuff, not only in the Bible, but in many of our holy books that are scattered around the planet. And it's kind of one observation, really, whether it's Muslim or Christian or Judaic or whatever. Again, it's one observation about one story, just told in a number of different ways. And you cannot help but see that at some point that scared the church, particularly in Europe, and they thought, right, we'll have to get rid of this stuff. So anybody who didn't do things their way, they just killed them, they executed them, and hundreds of thousands of people were put to the torch, and set on fire, and burnt alive, and millions of people were slaughtered in holy wars. And that scared the bejesus out of many Europeans for centuries to come. So they had to code this stuff into Christian theological language to protect themselves.
No doubt.
Knowing, though, that in future, more enlightened centuries, people would say, oh, hang on a second, this guy maybe wasn't a dyed-in-the-wool, sheep. He was doing his own thing. He was a lone gunman. He was doing his own operation, but he was couching it in Christian terms. And when we understand that, again, then we can start to decode it.
Right. And when you stop and think about it, it's no wonder they were so scared to do that. I mean, you know, look at what they were going through. The real wonder, if you ask me, was that they had the courage to continue on at all.
Yeah, you can't help but think that. And, you know, I gave a workshop just a few weeks ago, and we spent, 12 hours really looking at a lot of this material. Not just the Bible, but lots of different aspects of this. And some astonishingly brilliant men, largely, had to do this in total secrecy. And some of them who were caught, were executed. Some of them got away with it. Some of them went into exile. But such was their commitment to say, look, human beings are essentially pretty good, actually. I know when it gets dark on the planet, if in a manner of speaking, we might not think that. We might think human beings are kind of, as Bill Hicks said, a virus with shoes. But I don't think they are. I think human beings are quite cool and are quite astonishing animals, really. And mysticism, one of the great gifts of mystical study, is that it reveals the sort of magnitude and the magnificence of what human beings are capable of. And they have astonishing powers, astonishing abilities to change reality and to mold forms around them into different forms. And again, a lot of that knowledge has been mythologized and kind of quasi-fictionalized. So now when we think of men of power who can change reality, we're thinking of bloody Harry Potter and Gandalf and Merlin and stuff. And we've been asked to believe that it's fictional, that doesn't really exist. And again, that hasn't been my experience. That was the normal way for human beings to interact with the world until probably about the 7th century, and then things started to change quite a lot.
A whole lot. But getting to the questions I told you I had for you. In your book, you mentioned the inner and outer journey at the root are one and the same. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, the outer journey is, we come out of the womb, we do some stuff, and then we go into the tomb, from the womb to the tomb. That's the outer journey, the cradle to the grave, right? And you try and have a nice time, and you try and do good stuff, and you try and be a good man, and have some integrity and creativity and passion and honour in what you do. And that's the outer journey, in a sense. And it's an ascendant one, in the sense that we start off in a place of ignorance, and we gain knowledge, and then we live that knowledge, and we breathe that knowledge into our lives, and we gain wisdom. And that is left to his own devices. That is what a man will do. He will live a relatively good life. It's only when he's in pain that he starts to do stupid stuff. The inner journey is very similar in a way, in that it's one of growth and ascendance and integrity and honour. And to some degree, those two things are actually one and the same thing, because when you really scrutinise the difference between what we think is inside our head, us inside ourself, what we refer to as the world, the external phenomena outside, there isn't really a gap between the two. There isn't really one at all. There's only a theoretical gap that we talk about to help us think about the world in a certain way. But if you really analyse those two realms, the inner realm and the outer realm, the inner journey and the outer journey, there's no gap between the two. And so you have to say, well, the truth of it is that there is no inside and there is no outside. It's all one thing. So it's all one flow of consciousness. It's all one flow, even beneath that, of energy fluctuating in this sort of quantum vacuum. It's an intelligent energy, and we're part of it, just as the trees and rocks and the suns and comets are part of it. It's all one thing. And philosophically speaking, you come to a point when you study in the appropriate way, and if you have the fortune to study with a good teacher, where those barriers between what's in your head and what's outside in the world disappear. And if you do that in the wrong way, then you start to go bonkers, and somebody comes around in a white van and takes you away and locks you up. because you wouldn't know how to control it, and you would be what we would call a schizophrenic. If you do it in the right way, you become a man of wisdom, and you become a man of knowledge, and you become a man of power. And so, in this society, the distinction between those two things is a very, very fine one. It's a hair's breadth between the two. So it's a perilous journey in a way, because it's so unfashionable to do this stuff anymore. It's still really what people want is a Mercedes and $1 million, isn't it? And so to go around being a mystic, being an esoteric spiritual philosopher, is quite a funny thing to do in this day and age.
Right. I was just in here listening to you, and I was thinking, because you were kind of blowing my mind, so to speak, because I've had a Seth Barber on the air that's a psychologist. He's also the author of Spiritual Madness, The Gift of... Whoops, I don't have it in front of me. I'd read the whole subtitle. Can you hold on just a second? I don't need to get it, but I need to do something else.
Sure.
Pardon me, I had to cough real quick. But what I was going to say is he deals with what you were just talking about the, schizophrenic and the mystic. And he said the way Joseph Campbell put it is they're both swimming, or both in the same body of water, but the mystic is swimming while the schizophrenic is not, pretty much, basically. And he has been on my show once, and he's coming on again on the 15th. But I had a guest just the other day who mentioned the same thing. And I told her the same thing I'm telling you. What's blowing my mind is this is coming up like 3 times in a week, the same topic about the schizophrenic and the mystic, in other words.
Well, yeah, I think it's important that the world has a habit, particularly the intelligent world that flows through our minds and your listeners' minds and your guests' minds and whatnot. That kind of collective intelligence has a habit of bringing up the things that we need to look at. And it's not necessarily the individuals who are deciding to do that, although it might seem like that. It's like these are the things that we need to look at. And one of them is what is this distinction between unacceptable lunacy, to use the old-fashioned term, and like a scholarly, mystical state of enlightenment. What's the difference between the two? And when you start to look at that, you begin to ask questions of normality. And a lot of the American sort of psychiatric associations, the terminology for this is how many people do one thing as opposed to another. So if it's not acceptable to walk down the street and talk to yourself, if you live in a posh part of town and nobody does that and everybody's very conservative and genteel, if you walk down the street with your underpants on and nothing else and you start talking to yourself, you can be taken away. If you live in a different part of town where there's all kinds of artists and musicians and, all kinds of crazy stuff going on, and you walk down the street at 2 o'clock in the morning doing that, you might raise a few eyebrows and might think, who's this guy? But it doesn't have quite the same effect because the rules for normality are different in those two regions, are completely different. And what is considered conscious is different in Portland as it is in Texas, as it is in New York, as it is in Britain, Everybody has a different conception of that. So people are looking at what's normal, and that is a very kind of dangerous thing in a way. Like I was saying the other day to a friend of mine, it wasn't until the 1970s that homosexuality was removed from the classification of a mental illness in American psychiatric practice, which is a bizarre thing to say. I mean, I'm a total straight guy, whatever, but to think that so many millions of people were considered mentally ill because they did something that was unusual, right? So if you amplify that even more and say, well, there's a class of people going around who don't accept that the mainstream version of the world is real, and it's kind of like a matrix, it's an illusion, it's Maya, it's a veil. Those people place themselves, voluntarily it has to be said, but they place themselves in a dangerous minority in a way. So the mystic these days is not massively removed from some of the dangers that he used to find himself in 500 years ago. You have to be a little careful in how you talk about stuff. You have to have a sense of humour. You have to know when to keep your mouth shut. And if you're talking to certain groups of people, you have to know how to modify your language. It's no use going around just parroting the same thing in the same words.
Right.
Because it's only going to work with certain people. The real mystic becomes like a chameleon, and he's able to talk in many different modes with a different kind of lexicon and vocabulary, while still maintaining his integrity. You know, he's not deceiving himself, he's not talking nonsense. You can still be a sincere man, you can still move with honour, and you can still get your point across, but you have to be able to do it to quite a dynamic and diverse audience these days. You know, if I go and talk in New York, it's a different kind of talk than if I do it in Shasta, or if I do it in Seattle, you know? And that's my skill. That's up to me to be able to deal with that.
Exactly. Now, while you were talking, though, I did scroll down because he is this coming Saturday's guest, and I looked on his book cover right here on my page, and I got that title. It's The Spiritual Gift of Madness, The Failure of Psychiatry, and the Rise of the Mad Pride Movement. And, the main thing that he was covering on that is that these people that are labeled schizophrenic are getting medicated, and it's drugging them to the point where they can't use their gifts, and it's making things worse in the long run, in other words.
Well, it does, because it's not understood. If I went to a psychologist myself and said, hey, I've been looking at the world and I'm seeing a deeper set of layers to it, and the boundaries are drawing back, and I'm seeing entities, intelligent entities that aren't humans, and they're moving through the trees and the walls, and I can see them. That guy would write down in his book certain recommendations, and one of them would be medication to bring me back within the parameters of normal, acceptable behaviour. So even if I told him the truth of some of the things that I have seen in the world, that isn't acceptable in our society today. That is not acceptable. So the mystic is always pioneering to an extent, just like Galileo was with the Catholics. You know, he said, hey, guess what, chaps? The Earth isn't the centre of the universe. It's actually a star. It's actually the sun, and we all go around that. And for saying that, he got into a lot of trouble. A real lot of trouble, you know. Other guys like Bruno, he was burnt to death for saying it. Many people who made very simple, logical statements about the way things are that are true, that since we have found out to be true, when they said it in a manner that was opposed to normal, accepted, received wisdom, you become threatened, basically, by the establishment, because you pose a threat to their knowledge. You upset the apple cart. You say, we can't have this guy, Neil Kramer, going around saying human beings are their own sovereign authority and no one has any power over anyone else. Because that spoils the power structure, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It spoils the authority of the church and the police and the army and the government and the military and the IRS and goodness knows who. So,
which at one level or another are all the same.
Yeah, and the government don't really want that story blown apart, because if everybody realised how they are supremely their own authority, the old power structures would crumble very, very quickly. Within a few years, they would disappear. Because with that power also comes, for us, an extraordinary amount of responsibility to behave to cut a long story short, in an honourable way. So the mystic is obliged, is compelled to act with honour, because as you discover some of the esoteric inner meanings of many of these sacred works and practices and techniques and observations, power comes with them, the power to change the world around you. And that power is only bestowed on those who are fit to use it. Automatically, the universe will not allow someone unfit to wield that power to have it. It doesn't happen. So it kind of looks after itself, that system. It doesn't require anybody to mediate it. There's no priest class or politician class necessary to arbitrate that. There's no need for it. The universe does it quite happily itself.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, I've read that before. In your book, you make a distinction between dream and mystical experience. How do you know the difference between the two?
Well, every night we have something like, 20 dreams, I think on average is typical. And you only tend to remember the one or two in the last period of the dream cycle. Usually when you wake up, either to get up for the day or to get up in the middle of the night if you need to go to the bathroom or whatever. And that's the dream that you remember when the conscious flow is interrupted. Some of those dreams, certainly, are sort of montages that the brain arranges to do a recapitulation of what's been happening, the themes of your day, your week, your life at the moment, your hopes and dreams and fears and desires are sort of arranged like one of those games with the little tiles that you slide around and try and make different pictures of it and so on. And that goes on, there's no doubt about that. There are also other dreams that can be detected, which are definite, what the Victorian mystics would call astral projections, where your soul vehicle, if you like, detaches from your biological body and out you go. Off you go on an adventure to another place, to another sphere, another realm, another dimension, whatever you want to call it. It's very common. It happens all the time. And when we do that, there are a number of practices to bring lucidity and awareness into that realm. And when you do, when you bring your lucidity up to a certain point, which requires an awful lot of determination and practice, it's very, very difficult to do. But once that's achieved consistently, it's very simple to observe that where you're going and what you're doing and who you're communicating with are not elements from you or your mind. They're things that you have no relation to whatsoever. They're not aspects of your imagination. They're nothing you would ever have any possible reference to. You are, as it were, being transported to a completely alien and different realm. And there's a clear distinction between the two. So a mystical experience in that sense is a kind of spontaneous astral projection where what they used to call the etheric body, the energy body we might call it today, lifts itself out of the biological shell, the normal chemistry and meat of the body, and off it goes and has a look around. And it's kind of like a mini death. The mystics used to say we die every time we go to sleep, and it's exactly the same when we die permanently. And the only difference is then we don't come back to the body, we don't continue this adventure, we go and do something else. But every time we go to sleep, mystically speaking, esoterically speaking, we die. I.e. the body lays there, the personality stays with it, but the soul, our true essence, comes out, stretches its wings and has a look around.
I've heard about that before. It's amazing that you never really remember it or notice it such, because you're probably, assuming it's just a dream.
Yeah, you do, and it's quite a funny thing. I have an expression that I teach to my students, if we want to use that word, which is light units. And I say that every person has a number of light units, which you can think of it just like a battery, just like a sort of black and gold Duracell battery. And every day when you wake up, you've got a certain number of light units to spend on whatever you want to do. And if you're doing psychic things, if you're doing mystical things, you need really all of those light units. And so the problem is, the only reason why people why we don't all commonly share these abilities and powers for telepathy and telekinesis and projection and so on, is because we are using our light units, our mental psychic capacity on other things like watching television and reading and raising families and going out and working and all the things that we do. Everything you do, every time you brush your teeth, everything uses that stuff up. So the psychics, the men of wisdom of old, the sages of old, they would be very, very careful in not just what they did, but what they didn't do, what they chose not to do. And so they would do certain things to preserve those light units. Then when they went to sleep, or when they did a conscious waking practice, instead of having just 10 light units left, let's say, they had 90. out of 100. With that amount of light units, then you not only have memory of things, but you have lucidity and full consciousness in that experience. It's not just like, oh, that was a bit of a crazy dream, maybe it was real, maybe it wasn't. There's no doubt at all, because you were absolutely crystal clear in that space, because you had more light units available to you than usual.
Okay, well that makes a lot of sense. Okay, you also mentioned these mystical whoops, that's what I just asked. I should have moved that out of my way so I wouldn't try it again. Please explain psychic ability to us, because when I read your book, it had a very, what seemed to me to be a unique explanation of what psychic ability is.
Yeah, I would say, when we think of psychic abilities, particularly guys of our generation, let's say me and you are roughly within the same generation, we're thinking of Uri Geller, aren't we? We're thinking of a guy who's bending spoons and who's reading people's mind and who's making the hands on your watch move or whatever. And it's somebody who is physically altering the world around them in a way that science can't explain, right? And if you were to ask the average American in the street, they would say something a bit like that. They would say, like, there's all these new Vegas magicians who are hovering and goodness knows what, and mind readers and whatnot. But it's essentially a kind of mental technology that cannot be explained right now. And hard reductionist materialist scientists, of course, would say, well, that's all nonsense. That's not possible, because they view the world like a giant clockwork, don't they? Where there's gears and levers and springs, and this clicks that way and that clicks this way, and it's all totally cause and effect. Completely just a logical, cold machine, right? And that's like the other extreme of the fundamentalist religious person who thinks, well, God made the earth, he put Adam and Eve on it, they did stuff, load of people showed up, and if you behave well, you go to heaven, and if you behave badly, you go to hell. Both of those worldviews are very, very simplistic, and I might even suggest rather immature. When you go beyond that and say, well, the real story means that we have to rise above a tendency to polarize between trying to make everything physical. I think there's a word for this called reification, to try and make it a physical, real experience, to try and give it form, to try and give it a certain outline or substance. We can't help but want to do that, see it, feel it, touch it. So we're tempted to do that, and we're also tempted to do the other thing, which is, yeah, I believe this and I believe that. And I believe in clairvoyance and I believe in mind powers and so on. You have to kind of stop believing altogether, in my view. Believing is not necessary for the man of knowledge. It's not something you need to do at all. You can behave and conduct yourself quite happily without any beliefs. So when you put all that aside and say, well, there is some clockwork, and there is some spirit, there is this thing we call divinity, and there is this thing we call physics, all those things can actually fit quite happily together. And a few hundred years ago, scientists and mystics and philosophers, all alchemists, would all work together. And in fact, you would need some skill in each thing to know about what's going on in the world. It's no use just doing one. You needed a bit of skill in everything. A real Renaissance man, they might have called it in Europe at the time. When you have that view, you realize that what we call psychic power is essentially a way of operating the structure of reality, not in the third density state, but in a fourth density state. So you come out of this dimension, shall we say, this density of trees, rocks and cars and buildings, and you go into a fourth density state. In that state, everything is joined together in a sort of membrane. Everything is all one kind of viscous solution. It's not separated. The chair is not separated from the table. The glass is not separated from the dog in the kennel. The tree is not separated from you. It's all one thing. And so when you're in the 4D, it's kind of easy to cheat, really. You can change the structure of stuff. You can know what the cat's thinking. You can know what your wife's thinking. You can know what your friend's thinking, because you can just zip into that part of the system. And when everything is joined together, moving between one point and another is easy. And knowing what something else is thinking is easy. And changing the form of something is easy. The only thing you need is back to what we were talking about earlier, which is a very high level of light units. You cannot do that stuff if you're leading a normal, busy family, 5 days a week working life. You can't do it because you won't have enough psychic capacity to bring your consciousness into that realm. It requires an extraordinary amount of discipline, which we're not taught how to do. So that's why we used to have these mystery schools. One of their purposes was to discipline the mind, like, in the Star Wars movies, you take these young men and women and teach them to be Jedis, right? And you would say, well, you can't go out drinking and boozing and womanizing. You can't be going to your heavy metal concerts every night. And you can't be just watching telly and eating, Doritos every night either. You need to do something different with what you wear, what you listen to, what you read, how you move, how you breathe. Everything has to be done in a different way. All of it to give you more access, more capacity for this psychic ability, these light units, which are really, and this sounds a little bit funny, but they're really the sort of accumulation of your divinity, your divine spark, the light inside you. So you see this reference in the Bible all the time of light, the light inside, the light of the Heavenly Father and all this kind of stuff. Esoterically speaking, what they're inferring is that light is your gift of power, and we all have it. We all have exactly the same amount. Your access to it, however, is dependent on how you live and how you think. And that's the secret of a lot of mystical studies, to change the way you do those things.
And a lot of that also deals with the ego, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. The ego, if the ego gets in the way, it severely disables your ability to access those light units, because upholding a false image of yourself as Mr. Cool or Mr. Tough or James Bond or, Rocky Marciano or whatever, whoever your vision of yourself would be, that false egoic projection takes nearly all your light unit capacity up. It's nearly all gone when you do that. And so it's impossible to go anywhere with that. You just become flesh and blood totally, which is all right, no problem. Nothing wrong with that. But you can forget any psychic adventures. It ain't going to happen.
Okay. Now, in your book, you explain we are only privy to a very small slice of reality. Can you kind of elaborate on that?
Yeah, it goes hand in hand with what I was saying. Until you've matured in your wisdom and in your ability to perceive the world necessarily hides itself from you. So it's a bit like, a kid who lives in a home, and what he usually just sees is his little bedroom and the kitchen where he sits at the table and the bathroom, and that's kind of it. And then as he gets a bit older, he realises that, well, there's like a big living room there, and there's like a dining room, and out the back there's these doors and this huge garden, and you go, goodness me, and the world expands. And then he gets a bit older and he gets on his bicycle and he goes down the street and thinks, holy cow, there's like lots of these houses. In fact, there's streets, there's freeways, there's bridges, there's this enormous world. And then he's a bit older and he gets in a plane and he travels over the ocean, he goes to different, and the world keeps expanding as his maturity, as his mental faculties expand. So the world deepens itself. And our reality is very much like that. And just because we think, well, we know the Earth's round, we know what it's called, we've mapped it quite thoroughly, we know that now, we've done it, it's not going to get any bigger or deeper, there are no more frontiers. How wrong we are in thinking that. The world is very, very multidimensional, even on this little tiny planet, very deep, very multidimensional. We know quite a lot about the third density realm, the 3D realm here of, as I say, rocks and trees and cars and sidewalks and whatnot. What we don't know very much about is the fourth density element of that, the element where other, what you would call on your show, paranormal phenomena lie. That's where they live, that's where they exist, in the 4D. We don't know that very well. We can't map it too well. And some people are out there measuring it with various instrumentation and documenting it and giving evidence and testimonies and accounts. And they're accumulating some valuable knowledge. But even so, we're still just scratching the surface of that. And so that's what we mean when we say reality starts to deepen as our own truth deepens. As we get better, the world shows more of itself to each of those individuals.
Which would lead us up to the next question, which is about archons, which you would probably need to be operating at a fourth density level to have access to. Could you explain to us who the archons are and what their goal is?
Yeah, the word is archon, so the CH is pronounced as a K.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
It's okay, you can pronounce it however you like. Archon is really an old word from early pre-Christian literature, Gnostic literature, which means authority, essentially. And authority was a kind of what a Christian might think of as an angelic being. So like God says, right, here's the template, here's the planet, here's the stars, here's Venus, here's Mercury, and all the other bits and pieces. There we go, there's the template, right. I'm not going to do all the detail down there, so you guys go out and do it. And he creates these celestial beings, these super beings, what we would think of perhaps as angels, and off they go and do things and make the oceans and make the animals and design brains and design ecosystems and sculpt the world really into being, sculpt the chemistry and the physics and the biology and make the world. They actually do the sort of groundwork of it, if you like. So the architect has done his bit, and in Gnosticism we can think of the architect as a dude called the demiurge, as they call it, which is the head archon, and then all the subordinate archons all have particular tasks, and off they go and do them. And in Gnostic literature this was a very explosive idea, because they said not only are there different gods that do different things within the solar system and on Earth, but even the head guy, the demiurge, the main man behind it all, isn't the god. In fact, is an insane god. And he is distorted in his view of reality. And he has made an imperfect world. He has made a world based on paradise. The design is roughly right, but it doesn't quite have the harmonic resonance that the real one does. So he's created an imperfect place. It's based on utopia, but it doesn't actually work. Everybody's running around, behaving badly, and all the animals are eating each other. That doesn't happen in the real place, in the heaven that this is based on. And so the Gnostics, when they put forth these ideas, was very, very dangerous at the time. And yet they were absolutely convinced of the reality of this situation. And they said that, most of the negativity in the world can be explained and understood within this framework. And as I mentioned in the book, there's a collection of texts called the Nag Hammadi Library, where these early codices, these little gospels and documents and letters and treatises were collected. And they were only found, pretty recently, really, in Egypt and translated in the 1970s and stuff. And we can now buy this off Amazon for $25 or whatever, and read it. And it's fascinating. And it's a very, very thorough and deep examination of the origins of the universe and the origins of these beings, and Christ's interaction with people, Christ's knowledge and interaction of the universe in a much more profound way than we find in the Old and New Testaments. For any serious Christian worshipper or scholar or student or whatever, churchgoer, absolutely essential reading, I would say. If you want to understand some of the origins of some of the theology that gets taught in most American Christian churches, go and take a look at these texts, because there's something really interesting there, and it's well worth a look.
Okay. Now, also, in your book, you say all are on the same path back to the source, no matter how contradictory it seems. If this is the case, what was and is the purpose of creation and all that has or will happen?
Wow, that's a hell of a question, Royce. Goodness me. Who can answer that? Well, I'll have a go. I would say that as I have slowly but surely become a little wiser every day, one would hope, do your best, don't you? As you educate yourself and try and be a bit more sincere and a bit truer in what you think and feel and do, various theories refine themselves and get a little better and a little clearer. And one of those theories is what the Greek philosopher Plotinus called emanationism, which is the idea that God emanated this creation out, and it was really a sort of design in the same way that you might design a fractal. You know what one of those is? One of those fractal images. And God creates this fractal of the universe, and it's like a holographic fractal. It's like has multiple dimensions, and it contains the design and the architecture and the application for everything. All the trees and all the plants, all the mosquitoes and rhinoceroses and human beings and skies, everything is in this fractal image. And off it goes and emanates out into the void, into nothingness, into the darkness. And as it goes, part of that experiment to see what can happen and where it takes itself is God puts these entities into that emanation, into that creation, that have free will and that can do whatever they want with it. And the first ones are like angelic beings, and off they go and build stuff. And they do their own thing, based on some certain guidelines, but they can kind of do whatever they want. And then as time goes by, other orders of beings get created, including human beings. And they too have free will to do whatever they want. So to some extent, I think it's a very valid and useful way of looking at the world to say there is this divine emanation, there is this universe that creates multiple solar systems and stars and dimensions, and it is vast. It isn't infinite in my view, but it is vast. So vast that it's as good as infinite as far as a man is concerned. But as we look at it, we realise that it too is evolving and refining itself all the time. That's what it's trying to do. Not in a Darwinist way. It's a lot cleverer and deeper than that, I might say. I might dare say. Don't buy what Darwin was saying. I think that human beings have a part to play in that. So when a man betters himself and becomes a man of integrity and wisdom and compassion and so on, then he contributes to that evolution. So it's not separated from it at all. So every little click of wisdom that turns in our minds, every man and woman, every young and old person, children, everything, every time somebody grows inside themselves, that contributes to the evolution of the universe. Everything's doing the same thing. And so it's one huge system that's gradually refining itself and becoming more creative and more incredible and more beautiful as it goes along. And that's the experiment. And God sat there in the background, rubbing his chin, thinking, wow, look at this. This is amazing. This is incredible. So it's an experiment to some degree of free will. And God is all of it, and yet he's not necessarily listening to anybody's prayers as such. It just doesn't. It's not like the God of the Old Testament where there's an old man with a white beard or whatever. I don't think it's like that at all. As soon as you go into creation, you have to incarnate. You have to separate out from divinity. And yet all of it is built from divinity. All the Lego bricks, as you might say, of the universe are divine Lego bricks. But the entity behind it isn't accessible while you're in it. It's only when you come out of it that you can go back home again. So it's like a grand circle. You emanate out from the Creator. And essentially every free will entity, every human being, is a little piece of God. He chops a little piece of himself off and says, right, we'll call you Royce. Off you go and tell your story and come back to me. And we'll call you Neil. And off you go and tell your story and come back to me. But it might take you 1,000,000 years. And on that journey, you're going to be all different kinds of men and women and animals and earthlings and Pleiadians and Orions and Arcturians. You're going to do all kinds of stuff. You're going to be good and evil, cool and uncool, brilliant, awesome. And then come back. And when you come back on this grand, majestic return, you come back with your report, as it were, your report on what it was like to be in the emanation, what it was like in the creation, what you witnessed, what you saw, how you felt, what was weird, what was hurtful, what was wonderful, what was blissful. And you come back and you tell your story and you contribute to that fractal, that design, that architecture. And everything you do in that sense has this tremendous meaning and this tremendous importance. Everybody has the same potential to help with the design of this thing.
Okay. Well, Neil, I was going to mention we got like 10 minutes left, and now would be a good time for me to ask you real quick, like, if there's anything I haven't thought to cover that you would like to get out in the open here.
No, I don't think so. I think you've asked, you've questioned quite thoroughly, and you brought up some of the key points that are in the book. I mean, I would really say, just to broaden it out a bit, the Unfoldment, my book, I've been writing for a long time, and lots of different essays and audio books and whatnot and other materials, but this book in particular is my attempt to address a very broad audience, where somebody who's been doing this for a while, like yourself, can pick this up and enjoy it and get something out of it and think, wow, that's interesting. There's some really good, new avenues of investigation there, and, some nicely worded stuff. So if somebody who knows what they're doing is going to enjoy it. But even more satisfying to me is those people in our lives who are sort of on the borderline, who are not really satisfied with the rubbish that they get from television and newspapers and magazines, and are good men and women, and maybe they go to church and they're not really satisfied with what's happening in church. They want to have a relationship with the divine. They want to know about the deeper elements of the universe, but they want to get information in a different way. This book is my attempt to say, hey, I get that. I totally respect that, and I understand that, and I have some suggestions about where you might want to look and how you might want to go about that in your own way. Because I believe that this spiritual journey is a very, very independent one, and nobody really has any business telling anyone else what to do and what the right way is and what the wrong way is. Anyone who says that, don't trust them. So this is a book about independence. This is a book about saying, you know what, whoever you are, whatever you're doing, I don't care, but you have total authority, and your presence in the universe is highly significant, more significant than you'd believe, actually. And if you really want to live that and really want to take part in this amazing journey, then you need to sharpen your mind, and you need to sharpen your vehicle, your soul vehicle. And if you do that, the payoff is that life gets really, really interesting, really juicy and adventurous. So that's what this book is aiming to do. It's a very positive, uplifting book. And I think it definitely empowers, particularly those people who are maybe a little bit cautious, but it's also written in mind with people who've been doing this a long time, and say, hey guys, I'm going to give you something interesting to look at, and I'm going to give you something that you don't know as well. I'm going to give you some new stuff. So I've tried to do two things at the same time here, which mystically is a very common thing. So you've got a number of layers in it. So yeah, anyone who's interested, if you go over to neilkramer.com,
thank you.
Links are on there. It's in all the bookstores, and the normal ones, we know who they are, and you can get it online or go into physical stores. Take a look at it. I think people are enjoying it very much.
Yeah, I would agree. And if you don't mind me elaborating just a little bit on something you said just a second ago about nobody has the right to tell another person how to find God or how to do their walk with God and all of that. I would add to that, from my own personal perspective, that if a person is following the guidance of man, he can't follow the guidance of God at the same time, especially when the two guidances don't match.
Yeah, and I think that requires a certain amount of self-confidence to say that, which I don't think you have a problem with. But we have to understand that not everyone has the confidence that you have.
Yeah, that is true. I am a Leo.
Well, there you go. That's part of what I'm doing with the Unfoldment, to say, let me persuade you in the most sincere way, an honourable way that I can, that it is absolutely right, morally and ethically and spiritually, for you to do your own thing. You don't have to do it the way anyone's told you to. In fact, you have to do it your own way. But that can be like a really fascinating journey. It doesn't have to be scary or weird or lonely. Quite the reverse. Quite the reverse. It can be really something special.
Well, Neil, I want to thank you for bringing up that URL again. I was going to ask you in a minute. You kind of saved me the trouble. And I want to remind everybody that I couldn't have a show without my listeners anymore, and I could have one without my guests. So I definitely appreciate you folks. If you don't do nothing but listen in, you participated just by listening. Of course, questions in the chat room and call-ins are nice, but we take what we can get. Anyway, Neil, I want to tell you it's been a pleasure having you on here. I think you're a very knowledgeable man when it comes to spirituality and Hermetic traditions, and especially after reading your book and talking to you both. And I would like you to have an open door to come back to my show in the future.
Hey, thanks, Royce. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you being patient with me, because first time we tried to get together, I was trapped on the road, and you were very understanding. So I'm really glad we got together, and I enjoyed talking with you, and I hope your audience enjoyed it. And yeah, I'd love to come back. Perhaps in the near future we can do this again.
That sounds like a winner, because quite honestly, I didn't get time to get to all the questions.
Well, let's do this again in the near future. You keep in touch now.
Okay, you too now, Neil. Thank you very much, and you have a good night.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Okay. Now, folks, real quick like before I cut out of here, don't forget to come back Saturday. We're going to be talking to Seth Farber about the gift of spiritual madness, the failure of psychiatry, and the rise of the Mad Pride movement. And this is his second time on my show. Last time we ran out of time, but we had a lot of conversation going on in the chat room on this one, and I think it proves to be very interesting for the second time around. Don't forget to visit the folks over at World UFO Today. Don't forget to click on my friends link in the menu on the left, and you'll find 3 banners there. I need to remove that top one because he's not there anymore. But the 2 on the bottom, the Supernatural UFO, is a forum, and it's a great place to, visit and learn. And United Paranormal International, it's a social network. Another great place, wonderful people. Also, don't forget you can click on my radio favorites, 2 links down from my friends, and go to UKPN Radio with Gary Brown, JimHarold.com with, of course, Jim Harold, The Graylian Report with Micah Hanks, and Ohio Exopolitics. These are all great hosts for people that, want to hear more radio than just mine alone. And with that, folks, I'm going to call this a night. I hope everybody can make it Saturday. And for those of you that showed up yesterday and my site was crashed, I want you to know the site's fixed, the chat's fixed. Everything's fine. We're just waiting on everybody to come in and join us at www.paranormalpalace.com. Thank you very much, and y'all have a good night.